Are our lines still set?
Taz, it's all yours.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for attending. Joe talked about putting questions at the end, but we'd really like to handle questions all the way through. We do have some concepts that we want to share that really highlight how to get the best value out of dashboards and using dashboards for reporting and performance management. But we're really here to answer your questions. So at any time, ask your questions and we'll be watching the Q&A. So I'm going to share my screen here, and you can see a dashboard in performance management. This is a multi-trend view, or what some people may call a trend per item view, where each trend is related to a single item. This is a common report type that was available in eHealth that a lot of people used. And so I wanted to start just by talking about how we would rebuild this report type in performance management. This is one of the most common report types that I saw people struggling to recreate. So the report type that we, or in performance management, we use views that make up the dashboard or report. We kind of use dashboard and report interchangeably in performance management, where dashboard refers to live data in the product, and the report would just be to take that same dashboard and export it for a particular time range to a static report. So most of the time when we build reports, we go to the custom views because this gives us the greatest flexibility in building our report type. But in this case, we're going to use one of these dynamic views, the IM on-demand multi-metric trend report view, which is quite a mouthful. But this is a view that lets you take metrics from multiple metric families and chart them onto the same view. It has a number of different view types, and one of those is the chart per item with multiple metrics. So in this case, we're going to pick our metrics. We're going to take just a really simple report type here, in this case, availability. And then from the interface metric family, we're going to take utilization, and this is searchable. So we're going to take utilization in and utilization out. And we'll save this report. One of the nice things that we can do here is to be able to change the titles. This is something that I often see underutilized, but it can really help with your end users looking at dashboards and reports and understanding what they're looking at. So we'll call this availability and utilization. And we'll save the dashboard. And as you can see here, it's loaded up the availability and utilization for the last 24 hours. And you can see this over here. You could reset this. So if you wanted to say, there's an interesting spike here. Let's zoom in and find out what's going on. You could drop this down to the last hour. And it gives you those metrics for the last hour. Alternatively, we see here that this is aggregating things to the device level. And when you're talking about utilization, that's probably less useful. So this is where this particular view type becomes very flexible, because you can change the aggregation level. And what we really want to do is look at this by component, so we're getting the individual interface utilization. So then when we reload the view, it gives us a chart for each of these interfaces instead of for each device. And right now that's spread across 4 pages. And as you page through, that gives you the individual interface utilization charts. This can also be used to produce a report. So we have this option to print, which has always been here. And so we can print a PDF, but that only produces the first page or whichever active page. So if you said, oh, there's something interesting on this interface here, I just want to send this piece of it off to a colleague, you could print the PDF or the CSV. But what's probably more useful if you need to keep a record of data is to use the email or schedule report, where we now have the option to produce all pages of multi-page views. You saw that view with 4 pages. And you can either run it now and just run a single result, or, and this is where we really produce reporting, would be to pick a schedule. So we could set up, say, a monthly schedule where you're looking at a time range of the previous month. And that previous month time range is, if you do it on the 1st of the month, is going to look back to the previous month and get that month worth of reporting data, which becomes a very useful tool for auditing or providing regular reports. And you can create this schedule. You can also require a login to see it. There's a couple of options about whether you send this by email or produce it in a file repository. I'm not going to schedule this report now. See a question here, how do we focus on just one device and hence all of its interfaces? So in this case, instead of looking at instead of looking at a dashboard, we want to look at a context page. And to look at a context page, you navigate to a particular device. So I'm just going to go to the devices inventory here. And I've narrowed this down to a particular group, so it's only showing me devices in that group. And when we pick a device in that group, or when we go to a device, it's going to load the context page for that device. This would be similar to, in eHealth, the at-a-glance report, where across all of these tabs, it provides the full detailed information about one device. And if you drill into the Interface Health tab, it's specific information about the interfaces for that particular device. In this case, we show a lot of top-end tables, so top errors, top discards, top utilization. But if you wanted to add that trend per item report to this context page, what you can do is actually edit the tab of the context page, and it brings you to the same kind of dashboard editor. And you have the same access to the multi table. And so we can edit this and say add our same kind of utilization trend. And switch the chart type. We want that chart per item. And then you can pull in your interface metrics as necessary and take probably availability, and then bits per second in and out is a common one. And when you save that that context page, it doesn't just apply the context page to this one device, but if you, in this case there's only one, I have this set at the device level, so let me go fix that and look at the individual components. And now you have the trend per interface looking at a particular device. And this doesn't just apply it to this context page for this one device, but if you change devices and say pick a different one, it will keep the same context page format for that new device as well. And this device has a lot more interfaces on it. So you have, again, that multi-page report type. So you can page through when you're looking at live data, or when you go to schedule it, it gives you the option to take all multiple page views on the context page, and you can get that full data set. This is a shared system, however, so I'm going to remove that report from the context page. So that's the basic idea. If you want to look at a group of items, you would use a dashboard as your template. If you want to look at a single device or the context of a single device, you use a context page. And both of them have access to the full set of views and scheduling options to produce reports from those dashboards, as well as the live data with the dynamic time ranges and dynamic group context. Any questions about that basic model or anything else we've seen so far? Can we combine response path data and interface data in the same view? In this case, I believe, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, because of the model that we use to discover the response path data, we look at each test as an item and each interface as an item. And because they're not the same item, they won't chart to the same view. But you could put two views on the page that has interface data and response path data. Brian, do you have anything to add on looking at response path metrics and interface data?
No, I just want to make sure. I think we can, you're correct, we look at those as two different items. I'm going to try something here off screen here while you continue answering questions and see if we can work something up here.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll pass things to you to share. So one of the other key things that we use to report, especially over long time periods, is the idea of roll-up data. And the reason this is important is because as you look at long time periods, the response time can become slower. This is looking at the last hour, and that's pretty quick. But let's look at the last 30 days of data. Now this will still be pretty quick, but it's loading hourly data. And it's actually loading daily data. And so daily data for some of this is not as valuable. It really smooths things out and doesn't give us the granularity of information that we want to see. So what we would do to get better data is to use different roll-up types. And this is where when you look at the average, it's going to take the time period and average things out, and you lose a lot of the valuable information about spikes and the true behavior of the system. And this is where instead of using average data, you would want to use maximums. So we'll go to our same utilization metrics, and instead of taking the averages, we're going to pull in the maximums. Now, if you're looking at as pulled, the data for a single item, the average and the maximum is going to be the same. And actually for availability, I do want to pull it in, but I want to pull it in as the minimum availability. Because availability, you want to be 100%, so you really want to see anywhere that it is less than that value. And what the roll-up does is it says, across this time period, what is the lowest, or what is the highest value in the case of a maximum, or the lowest, so that even if you're looking at hourly or daily data, you're seeing the true spikes. And that lets you zoom in on the data to look at, say, hey, there's something going on with this interface. Let me go to that interface context page to see the detailed information. So I'll save that. And now we're still looking at 30 days of data, but instead of looking at the average information, we're looking at the maximums. And we can see that those values are a lot higher for a lot of these graphs than when we were looking at the averages. Now, sometimes you do want to see more granular than daily data on the report. And so this is where we could say, hey, let's use those maximum metrics, but we really want to see hourly data. And you can override the granularity of the data. And that's where you see resolution here. And by default, it will change resolution with the time range that you set. In this case, if we want to say, let's look at the 5-minute data, that will show the true 5-minute data, and that's where that's where it is going to take longer because we're looking at 30 days of 5-minute data. That's a lot of data points. But it will still pull things in for that granularity of information, provided that you have the permissions in the system to do so. We do have a user setting that lets you increase the amount of time that you're allowed to look at that high granularity data. So where you do really need that in-depth fine-grained information, it is available. Now, it's harder to read at this because we're looking at a chart every 5 minutes. And maybe that's not the ideal way to look at this. So let's pull this back to an hour. And that's still more granular than the default, but can help narrow the range of what you're looking at. So here you see what's probably more useful, and you can see across the month, hey, on the same hour each day, we're getting this kind of spike. And that's where you could then take this information to drill in and find out what's really going on. Brian, are you ready to share what you were looking at?
Yeah, we can show something here, but you're correct. Actually, I can just, if you want to navigate yourself to AZ-site, you just search for that device. And we'll go ahead and click on that. So when I look at the response tests, they are actually attached at the device level, not the interface level. So just as Chaz had put together the view here with the multi-metric trend charts, you can put in the response tests at this device level, but they don't appear to be attached at the interface level. I think, Chaz, maybe that's something we could take back with us as something to take a look at. That seems useful. But there is a way to look at the device level here. For this particular device, these are the tests that are associated with this device.
Just taking that as a note now.
Awesome. Great question.
Now, one of the limitations, and I'm going to go back to that multi-trend view, is that this view is limited to a total of 250 trends. And in most cases, especially if you're looking at live data, that's more than enough. But when you're looking at those larger audit reports where you need to produce multiple trends and have that long-term record, and you have a large enterprise that has a network of, say, 1,200 devices, you need to be able to have more than 250 of these in a single place. And so this is another area where we can leverage some of the tools that we have in dashboard editing. So what I'm going to do here is show an example. We don't have a group of 1,000 things, but what you can do is split that group up. There may be some logical grouping if you're, say, monitoring interfaces at store locations across the country. You might be able to do that regionally. If you don't have that kind of a clear-cut division, though, you could just do it based on some logic of the device name or even just a number. And use those group rules to create subgroups. And what that will let you do is then say, instead of taking a dynamic context, meaning that the view will change context with the dashboard, you can pick a specific group. So in this case, I'll just show you the example here. Maybe you want to grab the full set of data from these two groups. So you'll create a first view with one group, the Montreal branch, and save that. And then you can bring in a second copy of the same view and pin it to a different group. So again, we'll take that fixed view. We'll go to our Add and Remove Groups, bring in the second group. And you do have to rebuild the view here, so I'll grab those same metrics. And when you save that view, save this dashboard, it's going to load both sets of, and I chose the wrong metric type, or the wrong view type here, so let me fix that. When you load the data set, it's loading the data for the specific group you selected. So in this case, it's the Montreal branch office, and down here we have the Toronto branch office. And this Montreal one's a multi-page view. This could be significantly larger. But then as you go to schedule the report, if you run all pages of multiple views and have several of these views instead of a single view, so it will give you that full set of multiple inventory sets across all of your views. So while you don't have the same capability to sort in that case, you do have it clustered into smaller groups, and you can get all of the trend reports out in a single, all of the trends out in a single report. I'm just going to take a look at the questions to see if there's anything that I missed as it scrolled by. Nice to have a search box in multi-trend view. I'll take that as a note.
Chaz, I'm not sure if you saw that. I was trying to respond. I might not have the permission to do so, but the question from Richard about the 95th percentile and the goal line, I didn't know if we wanted to maybe show that.
Sure. Can you share that one? I missed that question.
Okay, this is the first one in the Q&A. I can,
Okay, I'm looking at the other box. So let me pass that over to you.
All my stuff out of the way here. Here's an example of a trend chart, and when you either create it by when you put it into the dashboard, or afterwards, if you come up and use that gear icon, you can come in and specify certain things. And there's a lot of knobs in here that can be turned. One of them is the ability to show projections. Another one is this 95th percentile, which I believe is what Richard was asking about. So this by default is on hide, so you won't see it. But if you come in here and click on show, you'll be able to show that 95th percentile. And the other thing that's interesting is this goal line, which is also hidden by default. You can come in and say show, and then the goal line value. So depending on what metric you're looking at, you know, if it's in a percentile, this would be a percentile value. So say I want to know what the 50% line is, I could come in here and I could relabel that 50% of my value, and then save that. And then inside of this interface, you can see now I have that goal line, this yellow color here that's available to me. And I also have my 95th percentile here. And another neat thing that are available in these charts that not a lot of folks realize is, if it's hard for me to see this 95th percentile, I can click here inside of the legend for the chart. And if I right-click on that, I get some options here. One of them is focus. And if I click on focus, it's going to remove everything else in that graph, so I can focus in on that one that I said that I wanted to look at. So I can get a better view of that particular metric. In busy graphs, it's really, really nice. And then I can just right-click and say unfocus, and it will bring back all of my my lines. I can, alternatively, I could also right-click and say hide. I don't want to see that one metric in here. I just want to see these others in here, and then I can come back in here and say show if I wanted to. But those are just a few things in these charts I wanted to show off. And again, you can do that when you're viewing them just by clicking the edit button here. You'll come in and you'll get to that same screen that we were at when we created the dashboard. Give it back to you, Chaz.
Sure. Actually, could you just show one more thing on that trend chart?
Oh, absolutely, yep.
Which is the ability to focus in on a specific time range. So we talked about the idea of looking at roll-up data and being able to zoom in. So let's show what that active zoom in looks like. It's just a click and drag, and it focuses that time range on that view. And then we have the option to apply that new time range where you've zoomed in to the entire dashboard. So if you have a dashboard set up for troubleshooting, you can focus in on a particular slice of time and then apply it out to the entire dashboard. Taking a look at a couple of the other questions, this is in my CAPM, I have no PDF information page option. How do I obtain this? It could be a permissions issue. The ability to print and run PDFs is user permission. So if that doesn't exist in your view, it could be a permissions issue. Also, the option to print the entire report where you get multiple pages from a multi-page report was added in CAPM 3.6, which was GA at the end of June. And so if you're not running the latest release of performance management, you wouldn't have the option to print all pages of multi-page views. So we did recognize that need in terms of reporting and delivered that functionality in the latest release. The next question talks about scheduling dashboards and reports, which says, how do I produce reporting groups that are then used for weekly, monthly trend reporting? This is one area where we do still see some opportunity for improvement. If you wanted to produce reports on the same report on multiple groups, you could use the same dashboard as your template, schedule the report. In this case, you see, if we're looking at Brian's screen, you see the report is pinned to that GeoView group. That will run this, when you schedule it, it will run this report for the GeoView. And what you might want to do here would be to edit the title, in this case the subject of the report, to mention the group. So you could, yep. And you would save that schedule. Then you would save the schedule. I think we won't save the schedule here. But if we were to change the context of the dashboard to a different group, you could schedule it again for that other group. So here we pick a different group. And when you schedule the PDF report, it honors your group selection. See another question here. Is there any plans of having dashboards with open API apps scheduled? That is something on our wish list. We don't currently have that. It's not something we're currently working on. Also looking roll-up data is fine. However, for a monthly, we really would like to get that 5-minute data, primarily during business hours across different time zones. This is the expectation for reporting as well as trending. And that is something that, like I said, we can do. The default is to change that, change the granularity to give better performance. But we do have the capability to run, I think, up to 45 days of 5-minute data with the high granularity view permission. Now, is that where you're, thank you for pulling that up, Brian. And what that does is it lets you run those reports for longer periods. So if you have particular users, often in a capacity planning role, you may take that run dashboards at higher resolution role right and give it to a limited number of people, and that will reduce the impact to the overall system. And if you have a particular user that you use to run off your reports, you would probably give that same role right to that user and produce your static reports as well as looking at your dashboards using that particular role right. And I think especially when you're looking at 30-day data and producing static reports off of it, the time that it takes to produce the dashboard is less important than that granularity of data. Can report scheduling be performed using the REST API? Brian, do you know if we have the REST API that supports report scheduling today?
I believe we do, but let me take a look at that here. Let me go off screen here and take a quick look.
Sure. We'll verify that. Can you pass the presenter role back to me while you look into that? Thank you. Another question, why is the 95th percentile varying for the span of the graph? So the 95th percentile is calculated for all metrics for a particular point in time. So what I mean by that is if you're looking at the device level 95th percentile information, it's taking the at any point in time looking at the 95th percentile across all of the polls for that device for that point in time. So that gives you that variance across time of the 95th percentile value. What that does is if you're looking at a group level, you file off the outliers from the group. If you're looking at an individual item, looking at the 95th percentile with as polled data, it will show you the same information between the as polled and the 95th percentile because you only have one data point, so there's no roll-up occurring. It's when it's applied across multiple things that you get that percentile. For monthly time frame, we find hourly resolution much more useful than the current default of daily. How to change it? We don't currently have a mechanism to change the default resolution for a time range. So this would be if you are typically looking at a monthly time range with a particular dashboard, you could use the fixed resolution values. Alternatively, sorry, there isn't really an alternative to that. I guess the other option would be to train your users to change that value as you're looking at 30 days of data. But that does seem like something that we could note down as a potential future enhancement. Looking back at the chat, do you have report center type capabilities with if then else statements limiting results by math calculations? Really just the type, the BI programmatic interface. We don't have that today in the Performance Center dashboards. That is something that we're looking at adding, but as I said, it's not something that is available today. We do see users apply that logic through Open API apps, and we do have that kind of logic available in the Open API, but not directly as part of our dashboarding tool set in Performance Center. Can we fast poll certain interfaces in response paths? What's the limit and impact on the system? You can apply fast polling to specific interfaces. The way that we handle this is by monitoring profile, and you can filter interfaces into monitoring profiles to configure that 1-minute polling. And then if you're looking at the as polled data, it will show you the 1 minute for interfaces that have 1-minute polling and the 5-minute for interfaces that don't. The impact to the system occurs in a couple of places. One is it takes slightly longer to render the report because you're looking at 5 times as much data. It also has an impact to the database because you're storing 5 times as many data points. And we handle that, especially on the database side, we show the impact to the system in the sizing tool, which gives really detailed information about how much database size or how much database space to expect based on the number of interfaces you're applying fast polling to and the number of metrics you're collecting for each of those interfaces. Can each user configure a time zone for all? Can each user configure a time zone for all or for my dashboard? So this is something that you can configure per individual user. and can be edited per user. So if we look at my user settings, we can pick a time zone, and I can pick any time zone. In this case, I want Eastern Standard Time because that's where I'm located. And as I navigate between dashboards, it will dynamically change the times that I see to my time zone. And that's up to each individual user to set their time zone. Whoever's configuring the users can set it as well. It's one of the user configuration options. You can also choose the time format, whether it's 12-hour or 24-hour. You can pick a default group so that as a user logs in, it always shows them a particular group. Brian, did you find the detailed information about the REST information?
Yeah, I don't see it in there, Chaz. So I want to take that back and we can update the folks afterwards. But I mean, there is a schedule endpoint, but it doesn't look like you can create new schedules from that endpoint. So I just want to verify internally here before we give out the final word.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the time zone applies to your views and menus. For the individual user, it will not impact what other users see. Can we create CLI-based monitoring indicators? Brian, can you, I'm not sure that I understand what that question's getting at. Are you familiar with that aspect?
When you read it, it did not resonate with me. I'm not sure. Are you seeing that in the chat or the Q&A?
In the Q&A.
Q&A. Create CLI-based monitoring indicator. Zelko, I'm not sure exactly what. Oh, okay, instead of SNMP. Yeah, so Performance Center, there's a couple ways you could go about doing that. So if you had an agent on a system like Net SNMP or CA's System Edge agent, you can do things like monitor log files for their status or for a value or something like that, and then map that to an OID within that agent. So basically the agent would be doing whatever command line thing you need it to do, and then transforming the result into an OID that we could read. The other option there is there's a module to performance management that called CA Mediation Manager, which is typically used when you have to talk to other systems at scale. And that can talk to like other enterprise management systems or to a database or, you know, do those kinds of things as well. And those metrics can then come into performance management. So those are the two kind of off the top of my head ways that we would get non-SNMP data into the system from CLI type activities.
I see another question that came in on my Q&A. It says, how can we have a set of devices set their interfaces and the display so that their interfaces and display is limited to their time zone? For example, London 8 to 6 on the same display as Tokyo 8 to 9, or 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so this is talking about looking at business hours for individual interfaces in the same view. We can't do this in the same view. We could potentially look at this by taking the views and pinning each view to a specific group, and then applying the business hours of that group to the view. So while you wouldn't get a table that would show you, say, top N across sites in London and Tokyo within business hours, you would have a top N of the London business hours and a top N of the Tokyo business hours, and you could put them side by side to look at a comparison. Let me run through an example of how we could do that. Let me edit my dashboard here. I'm going to drop these trend views and then go to the custom views here. We'll pull in tables. In this case, I want a 2-column layout so that I can see the groups side by side. And I'll pull in these 2 tables. So I'm going to go to interface metrics, since that's the most common area that we see people looking at. So here I'll pull in my utilization. Actually, I'll pull in utilization in and out, which provides more valuable information. And I'm going to use those same Montreal and Toronto groups because we have them. And we're going to apply fixed context on these groups. So here we have the Toronto group, and we want to pick a specific time zone. This is where you can apply a different business hours filter as well. So we can pick whichever business hours we want that are applied to this group. In this case, the Toronto branch office has these weekday hours that we'll take. So we have a fixed time zones, or we have the fixed business hours and the fixed group. We'll save this view, go back to the Montreal group. We haven't picked a group yet, so let's pick our group, where in this case we'll go grab the Montreal branch group. And then picking the time zone, again, we'll take our weekday hours, and we need to apply our time zones here. So in this case, we know that Montreal is in Eastern Standard Time. And if we go over to the Toronto group, we know that we need Central Time. And this would have been a better example with the trend view, which would have had the timestamps across the whole view, but it is pulling in the information as applied here. So in this case, it's showing for Montreal, we're using Eastern Time and the business hours for Eastern Time. For Toronto, we're using Central Time and the business hours applying to Central Time. So you can get them side by side, but not in the same view. We have another question in the chat about health reports, showing the health characteristics of the device. eHealth produced these health reports that used a health metric to compare things across technology types. We don't have a direct replacement for the health reports. The closest thing that we have would probably be the scorecard views, where you can create a view that uses indicators based on multiple metrics to indicate whether something's healthy or unhealthy. Brian, do we have a good scorecard view set up in the demo environment?
Let's see here. I have one that I can show.
Okay, I will pass back to you so you can show how we can use that. I pass you the presenter role so you can share when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm
we'll
sorry. I'm just getting things. Yeah,
sure.
Just get things in order here. Okay, share screen. Okay, so there's a couple different ways. This keeps popping up. There's a couple different ways that you can use these scorecards, and one that we see often is that I'm in a network operations center, so it's my operations or my level 1 staff needs to be able to quickly understand whether there's an issue within the environment. And these scorecard views do exactly that. It gives us a nice checkbox, green checkbox, or it gives us an orange box or a red X symbol when things are hitting their thresholds. And as an example, in this particular view, we have a geo map going on up here. And then I have these scorecard views that are available. I'll just make these a little bit bigger. That are available for certain metrics. So, for example, availability, CPU utilization, memory utilization. And we can scope these to groups, devices, or components. And in this case, we're looking at groups. So I can see for all of the groups that I have, or all the sites that make up my geo map here, I have a corresponding group, and then we have a scorecard that tells me for whatever metric it is that I'm looking at, whether it is healthy or not. And, you know, the way that performance management works is that it normalizes items across certain technologies. And by an example of that, CPU, if I do this CPU utilization, it doesn't matter if inside of these site groups I have servers, or I have Cisco devices, or Juniper devices, or Palo Alto devices, or whatever I may have. We normalize their version of CPU into a generic metric called CPU, and that's what we're looking at here, right? So even though we might be looking at different OIDs, or obviously we're looking at different OIDs for different vendors or different specific devices, we normalize that up into a thing called CPU, and then we can do some trending on that. Another one, too, that we can look at here, a nice feature that scorecards do. So you can see, again, on this top one, I have sites. And then down here, I'm looking at individual interfaces, right? So it's just when we create this view what we scope it to. And you can change that later if you'd like to. But one of the things that I'm showing here in this scorecard view is the ability to do projections. So if I look, I can see, and you know, unfortunately, it's 100% across the board here. So we should probably get some different data in here. But I can see for each of these sites what my average is. That's what this column is right here. It's 100%. And then my time frame for this particular view is for the last hour. So if I go back, you know, it's almost 11 o'clock here. If I go back 1 hour, I can see what it was at 10 a.m., what it was at 9 a.m., 8, 7, 6, 5. So I can get some historical context about what those values were and whether I had met those values up to the current time. And then additionally, what I can do is add into these a projection, up to 3 projections into the future. Again, using this last, because we're looking at this hourly chart, it will go 1 hour into the future, 2 hours, 3 hours into the future, and tell me what I think these values will be based on my historical performance. And then if I change this to 8 hours, just to kind of drive this point home a little bit, is that, okay, I can see what it is right now. I can see what it was 8 hours ago, 16 hours ago, 24 hours ago, 32 hours ago, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the future, this is what we think it's going to look like, you know, as we move forward into the future for each of those values as well. So this is just a different way that we can use scorecards. They're configurable. As you can see, we can do by the group, by the device, by component. The number of time intervals into the past that I want to see on my graph, that was those 6 that I was just showing you. The number of projections into the future, none or up to 3. And then here is where I put in the thresholding for each of those metrics. And that's what actually changes the color on those indicators from green to orange to red. The same thing, sorry, Chaz, one last thing. We keep the same time frame, business hours, and context as well as the others.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to show with the scorecard view, and if you actually pass the presenter role back to me, I'll share my screen here. We have 2 different scorecard views. Brian was just showing you the scorecard trend, which does that great historical value and future projections. We also have the scorecard table, and this gives you a little bit more flexibility to replicate those health indicators where if you're looking at, say, how's the network performance at the device level, you can look at the calculate level by device, and then pull in your interface metrics. We're just grabbing utilization in, out, and availability as common metrics. And then you can say for each metric what indicates a minor, major, or critical state, and then how important is that? For example, if you know that your utilization out on a particular device set is interesting but not important to the overall health, you could set it to a weight of 0. You probably want your, but the overall availability is going to be extremely important. So let's increase the weight there to 3. And so this will say that availability is the most important factor in the overall score. Utilization out is not important, but we want to show it on the scorecard. And utilization in should impact the information here. In this case, though, we want to say that, hey, availability should not have alerts when the values are high, but when they're low. And so we can reverse these and say anytime it is 99%, that'll be a minor, major will be at 95, and a critical will be at 90. And this will just reverse the scoring order for that metric type. And so this is going to show across the devices. It gives you that score for multiple metrics on the devices. how much past data is used to do forecasting and historical baselines. There's a couple of different answers there, so I'll get into the details. We calculate baselines along with our roll-up data every hour at the end of processing. So if you're looking at a baseline metric and comparing on a trend view the current to the baseline, that's based on the full data that the system has collected over time. When you're looking at the scorecard views individually, it's just pulling in the data for the time range that you're looking at. So that's up to however many days of, however many points of data you're pulling in, and then just using least squares regression to get you the slope of the line and project that out.
Hey, Chaz, I need to drop for another call. Thank you
okay.
for letting me participate.
Thank you so much for coming on, Brian. I think we are just about out of time. Isn't that right, Joe?
Yes, that is correct, Chaz. We are a few minutes past the hour.
Well, a lot of great questions. Thank you all for coming. We will have the recording of this posted on the communities. Please engage with us there if you have follow-up questions. We will hold future sessions like this focused on other areas of performance management and how to get the most out of the system.
Great, Chaz. Thanks for a great presentation as always, and thanks to Brian too. A lot of good questions out there. So, Chaz, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send these questions over to you after the session is over, and in the event that you weren't able to get to any of them, you'll be able to provide the answers. And like Chaz said, this has been recorded, so we will get this out into the communities. It'll probably be out there in about a day or so. And again, thanks everybody for joining, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.